power to build mighty ships and armies poured from the belly of a blast furnace. It was part of an explosion in technology sweeping across Europe at the turn of the century. One which was reshaping all of the continent's major cities. Electricity turned night to day. Automobiles altered the speed of travel. Airplanes defied gravity. To the monarchs who ruled most of Europe, the technology explosion simply meant more. More wealth, more military might, more colonies around the globe. But for ordinary people, the changes had a profound impact on what they expected of life. As one writer put it, people were no longer content to occupy the place that destiny had assigned them.
It is in many respects the moment when a vision of immense and unlimited possibilities became available to anybody. And of course, what that meant is not necessarily hope. It could also mean intense frustration, because with the vision that possibilities are there comes the question, why not me? Why not farmers? Why not factory employees? Why not women? These two elements of imbalance of power, of inequality between those who have and those who have not, between those who are running the show and those who feel that they ought to be running the show, produce this amazing sense of an approaching storm in 1914. What storm it will be, nobody knew, but it was going to come. Across Europe in the years before the war, clashes broke out between those who cried out for change and those who resisted it. One clash, which was a sign of the turbulent times, was the fight in Britain over women's right to vote.
There was a view that women shouldn't have the vote for all sorts of reasons, one of them being that a woman's brain was smaller than a man's brain, therefore she couldn't possibly make this political choice when it came to an election, that it just was not within her kind of intellectual capacity to make that kind of a choice. It sounds ludicrous to us, but this was something that even the most intelligent people believed very firmly.
A group of women called the Suffragettes spearheaded the drive to win British women the vote. When peaceful protest did not succeed, the Suffragettes began destroying property. They smashed windows, set fires, and bombed buildings. Then in 1913, on Derby Day, a lone suffragette, Emily Wilding Davison, walked onto the track to block a racehorse owned by the king. The protest cost her her life. Yet no matter how desperate the protest, the British government refused to share the power of the vote. Instead, the government began its own campaign to silence the suffragettes. 7 months before the outbreak of war, a leading suffragette, Sylvia Pankhurst, was sent to prison for breaking a window. Some men who committed acts of civil disobedience were given special status as political prisoners, but not the suffragettes. They were treated as common criminals.
So the suffragettes said, okay, we're going to demand for our political rights and we're going to go on hunger strike. So then the government start force feeding, and it was a very harrowing experience.
Presently, I heard footsteps approaching outside my cell. I was strangled with fear, yet alert to every sound. A crowd of wardresses filled the doorway. They flung me on my back, on the bed, and held me down firmly by shoulders and ankles. Then the doctors came stealing in. A metal instrument pressed against my gums, cutting the flesh. They were trying to get a tube down my throat. I braced myself to resist that terrible pain. They got it down, I suppose, though I was unconscious of anything then, save a mad revolt of struggling.
The suffragettes were few in number, but there was another movement that threatened the established order, which involved millions. Across Europe, working people embraced the banner of socialism. For most, it was more a cry of pain, a demand for justice, than a blueprint for the future. One of their leaders was a member of the French Parliament, Jean Juarez. From humble beginnings, Juarez had risen to become one of the most prominent men in France. But in a style that would endear him to supporters and opponents alike. He chose to live life simply, but with great zest. A friend wrote about spying the rare creature that was Juarez, strolling along a city street.
Jauntily set upon its head was a hat, somewhat the worse for wear. It sauntered along like a youth upon a new world, or a strolling violinist who had mastered fate and discovered how to fill the moments with happy unconcern.
The private Juarez was famous for his good humor. But the public man looked across Europe and was terrified by what he saw. The five great powers locked in an all-out arms race. Juarez proposed a different way.
What will the future be like when the billions now thrown away in preparation for war are spent on useful things to increase the well-being of people, on the construction of decent houses for workers, on improving transportation, on reclaiming the land? The fever of imperialism has become a sickness. It is the disease of a badly run society which doesn't know how to use its energies at home.
He had a standing unlike any other man in the world, and that standing was on the basis of his embodiment of a vision, a peaceful vision of change and prosperity, in which the fundamental issue was the dignity of every human being.
But there were also radical socialists, like Lenin of Russia, who saw great promise coming out of war. A war with Austria, Lenin wrote in exile, would be a splendid little thing for the revolution. In the years before the First World War, a number of crises between the great powers threatened to erupt into the cataclysm that Lenin hoped for and Juarez feared. Some occurred in the troublesome Balkan states. Here, the Kingdom of Serbia bordered the Austro-Hungarian Empire, where many Serbs lived. A local conflict always brought with it the chance of a major war between Austria and Russia, the traditional protector of the Serbs. In 1912, that moment seemed to have arrived. In the midst of the crisis, Jean Juarez helped organize an emergency socialist congress in Basel, Switzerland. 500 delegates from 23 nations filled the hall of Basel's great cathedral. As the bells of the cathedral rang, Juarez strode to the pulpit, determined to inspire the delegates to return to their homes and try to stop the war.
I think of the words which Schiller wrote at the head of his beautiful Song of the Bell. I summon the living. I mourn the dead. I break the thunderbolts.
Then Juarez leaned forward and appealed to the sea of upturned faces.
I summon the living to resist the monster which would ravage the land. I mourn the countless dead, now buried in the east, whose rotting stench fills us with remorse. I will break the thunderbolts of war, now hurtling across the sky.
They were the last 2 years Jean Juarez had to live.